Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score, Week 3, the extended edition, where Jacob and I, and that's Jacob Gibbs, my lovely co-host over there, get into all the stuff we didn't have a chance to get to on the Beyond the Box Score earlier in the week. There's still so much we want to talk about. We're nerds. We like talking about X's and O's. We like talking about fantasy football. We like trying to give you an edge and try to find you guys buy lows, sell highs. That's what this show is going to be focused on, among other things. And as we've done throughout all of these shows, we're bringing on a guest. And we're bringing on somebody who we have a ton of respect for. You know him, and I'm sure you know him because he does an amazing job over at Fantasy Pros. That's Pat Fitzmaurice. I hope I got that right. Every time I pronounce the last name on this show, never know. This one seems easy enough. He is working for Fantasy Pros. Check out fantasypros.com. You guys all know about Fantasy Pros, but if you don't, check it out. Unbelievable resource, unbelievable site, great rankings, great content. That's where, like, off-season content there is wildly underrated, and you're a big part of that, Pat. And then also the podcast over at Fantasy Pros. So Pat and I have never actually met or done a podcast together, but we're both Wisconsin Badgers fans, so we're both living in a little bit of misery at the moment. But how are you doing outside of that, Pat?
Doing great, Dan. Yeah, just commiserating over the Wisconsin Badgers. Kind of rough start. Haven't even been able to put away the cupcakes this year, and then of course got trampled by Alabama this past week. So, yeah, I'm not deriving much joy from college football these days. But we're still early in the season. No one's overreacting to anything. I'm sure everyone's taking it all rationally. So, pretty boring start, right? And great to see you and Jacob again. Jacob and I have done several shows together. You and I never have, Dan, but looking forward to changing that.
Yeah, and I think you're going to like what we do on this show. It's a little bit different than some other shows. So, Jacob, how are you doing, my man? Before we get into the crux of the show, what's going on with you today?
I'm feeling great, man. I'm psyched to have Pat here. The reason Pat and I have done several shows is because I seek him out because, man, this guy, I'm trying to crack the code of the rankings and the accuracy, and, like, Pat is on it every year. I don't know what it is. He's got some crazy attention to detail, but, like, he's just a pro, man. I think the big thing is when I listen to Pat, he doesn't get swayed too high or too low, and that's why he's such a great guest as we, like, approach week 3. It's, like, level-headed, and he's got the experience, and, like, I'm so psyched to talk about some of these players because we've got some guys that we're pretty worried about, and so we're on this, like, buy low, sell high, and I really want to hear what he's got to say.
You're too kind, Jacob, but I've forgotten the code. I'm off to a terrible start in the rankings accuracy competition. Normally, week 2 has been a really good week for me because, like, a lot of people overreact, and I just kind of keep steady. And week 2 was just awful this year, so I need that code back.
We're all looking to navigate through the new NFL with these too high looks and with the passing yards and passing touchdowns way down. We're looking for the edge, and that's what we've done. And the injuries have played a factor as well. We're going to talk about a lot of that today. Some of these buy lows that we're going to start with here going into week 3, they are based on some injuries and situations that have changed. So without further ado, let's start with our first buy low here. I want to talk to you guys about Brandon Aiyuk, who obviously missed a lot of training camp, and I would say at least in week 1, wasn't at his full capacity, both from a snap share standpoint and just from, does he look like himself out there? Where are you guys at on Brandon Aiyuk heading into week 3?
I'm not worried at all.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah. So there's been 2 plays. Obviously, the week 1 game, everybody saw him drop the touchdown. Last week, there was an awkward throw. I don't know what it was with Purdy, but the timing was just off, rolling out to his left. He had Aiyuk wide open with almost like half of the end zone available to him, and he threw it out of bounds just where he couldn't get to it. He could have 2 more touchdowns, and then now he's got Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey out, Deebo being the one that's particularly important in terms of looking back at past splits. When Deebo's been off the field, Aiyuk's target involvement goes way up, and his efficiency goes up as well. And then the last thing is this matchup is amazing. So, like, it's been a bit of a slow start, but at this point, Aiyuk is playing his full normal role, and then he gets the Rams this week, who have struggled particularly against outside receivers. This is the defense that Jameson Williams went nuts against in week 1, and then Marvin Harrison, of course, got his season on track in week 2. Just seems like you couldn't draw a better spot for Aiyuk to get his season on track here.
Where you at,
Agreed.
Pat?
Yeah, yep. Great spot. And maybe he needed a couple weeks of ramp up after missing training camp. I did have some concerns about him. I thought maybe he was being a tad overdrafted, just because Aiyuk was not a prominent. He was not among the target leaders last year. I think he averaged like 6.5 targets a game, but just crushed it with efficiency. Like, he was fantastic in yards per target, yards per route run, yards per catch. And really the target outlook hasn't fundamentally changed for the 49ers this year, except for right now with Debo out. So this is a great opportunity for him to make hay. As Jacob mentioned, the matchup against the Rams looks really good on paper. So he does have an opportunity the next couple of weeks to really pile up numbers if they decide to pepper him with targets.
Yeah,
I just want to give the data on the target rate and how much Debo influences it. With Debo Samuel on the field last year, his target per route run rate was 22%, which is about what you'd expect for a player who's running such deep routes. But with Debo off the field, this is 120 routes. His target per route run rate rose to 29.4%. For reference, that's like just a little bit above Justin Jefferson. That's the kind of role that we're looking at. And I bring up Jefferson because really the only people who are similar to Aiyuk in terms of being able to run such deep routes and still draw a respectable target share are Jefferson and Nico Collins. And so like that's kind of the type of player that we're dealing with here in this system that like can utilize that X in such a perfect way. So like I think people when they hear this are going to be like, oh, you can't trade for Aiyuk. You're not going to get him cheap or whatever. Like if you can get him even at the value that he was drafted at, I think that is a discount because it's a new Brandon Aiyuk than the one that we had during the draft season. We know that Debo Samuel's out and it could linger. We don't know what's going to happen with calf injury, right? Like, and so at least in the immediate short term, Aiyuk is more of a Justin Jefferson type of player for fantasy than he was at the beginning of the season. And if he gets that momentum where he's just rolling, we've seen Purdy and Shanahan be willing to just keep dialing it up to Aiyuk because he's that good and people can't stop him. So I do think like even if you're not buying at some massive discount from where he was drafted, any ability to trade for Aiyuk is worth jumping on. In my opinion, he's that good.
I like it. I think he's probably the best trade for candidate, and you broke down the case. And I think one extra thing to add to that before we move on is just this offense is very different now because Jordan Mason's playing almost all of the snaps at the running back position. And between going from Jordan Mason to Christian McCaffrey, there's a completely different outlook for this offense. I watched this offense on tape. It does not look the same because McCaffrey commands targets in the passing game, and Jordan Mason does not command targets in the passing game. That could be even more work for Aiyuk, honestly. So it could be a situation where you could be looking to sell guys at like. I'll throw a name out there. What would you guys, would you guys consider trading James Cook for Brandon Aiyuk or
yes.
are you okay?
Pat? I love it.
I can't go there. I can't go there.
Okay.
I love it.
What about, let's see. I'm trying to think of a wide receiver who's had a hot start
Mike Evans.
Mike Evans. Yeah. Would you could trade Mike Evans for Brandon Aiyuk?
Yeah.
Godwin?
Yeah.
I'd trade Godwin for Aiyuk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So look, you're going to have to get a little bold because I've tried it this week. I've tried to trade for Brandon Aiyuk, and people are not selling him at some discounted price. They're well aware of the Debo injury. But at the same time, like Jacob said, there could be a really, really good upside here from a target share standpoint. Let's get to another guy who I think is on the cusp of potentially breaking out, and it's Chris Olave from the Saints. The Saints offense has looked a lot better than people expected. Shout out Clint Kubiak. He's doing a phenomenal job on tape there. Derek Carr is also playing really good football, and that's something that we've seen them build a rapport. Where are you guys at on Olave? I'm going to start with you here, Pat. Is Olave a buy low for you, or is he kind of priced where you think he should be right now?
No, he's absolutely a buy low. I still think he's the same low end wide receiver one that he always has been. And yeah, I mean, the Saints offense has just clicked. I think that offensive line is a lot better than people thought it was going to be. Greater use of play action has sort of opened things up a little bit for Derek Carr in this offense. Yeah, Kubiak has worked wonders so far, but Olave's numbers have been kind of tamped down simply because the Saints haven't needed to throw that much. They've jumped on the Panthers and the Cowboys right out of the gate in both of their games. So Derek Carr's averaging like 20 pass attempts a game. It's not going to be like this the entire season. They will need to throw more than this, and that's going to favor Olave. He just got kept out of the end zone last week, and I have Olave in a lot of teams. That one hurt, where seemingly every part of his body except the ball made it into the end zone. Yeah, there are better days ahead for Olave for sure. And it's already looked good with Chris Olave. We just haven't gotten the passing volume we need.
Jacob, where you at there?
I was really encouraged this morning that I heard Matt Harmon on the Yahoo Fantasy podcast talking to Nate Tyson. He said that he went and charted Chris Olave through the first 2 weeks, and he was really excited to see him that the Saints had added more nuance to his route tree. He wasn't running just as many goes and straight hitches like he was last year. That was something. Shout out Clint Kubiak. Shout out to us. I don't shout out us very often, but this is something we've been detailing in the newsletter on Beyond the Box Score. Is like this is a real change. This is an offensive coordinator from the same tree as Shanahan that uses Brandon Aiyuk in this way in the X receiver role. That's the role that Chris Olave has been playing now, and so there's much more nuance to the routes he's running. And that is important for fantasy. That's borne out in the data. And then it's also just clear when you watch the film, there's so much layering that's going on with these route concepts. So far, it's been Rashid Shaheed that's been the one that's coming down with deep touchdowns, but I think it could just as easily be Olave. And then also, I think Olave is going to have a lot more yardage after the catch potential because they are getting him involved over the middle of the field and everything. The one thing I would say is don't completely overreact to what we've seen with the Saints because we are dealing with thin margins here, especially with the passing game pieces, because they are running so much and the passing volume is so low. If you look at this thread that I just created on Twitter where I go through the fantasy points data's expectation for each player on their expected fantasy points, both Saints receivers are outside of the top 50, which sounds wrong, but it's just because of the raw number of routes and targets that they have. There were 13 players last week that ran more routes in week 2 alone than the Saints receivers have run all season. It's not going to be like that every week because they're not going to be blowing people out every single week. But they are even in neutral situations running more than any team. So I personally think I would rather have Brandon Aiyuk right now than Olave. I wouldn't go completely overboard, but if you're able to get Olave cheap or even at where he was drafted, I think that is a good decision because we've seen this offense can create explosive plays with the best of them.
Yeah, and Olave was somebody who really did a great job of tempoing his routes and understanding how to win on the vertical route tree without always just being pure speed. You saw that all throughout Ohio State a little bit earlier in his career with the Saints. So I like that call that he could be the one with those design deep shots, which really will change his profile moving forward. Let's get to another player here who has been a disappointing start, could be a buy low situation. I struggle with this player because I really struggle with the person designing the offense and the person calling the offense and really the regression of the offensive line. That's really another factor that hasn't been discussed, and it's the Chicago Bears offense, and it's DJ Moore, their projected wide receiver 1. I'll start with you this time, Jacob. Is he a buy low for you?
Yeah, he is. The matchups have been really difficult for the Bears when it comes to their offensive line. They've really been tested. I think Houston's pass rush is incredible. I love the matchup this week against Indy. Indy's been just killed by wide receiver 1s. DJ Moore does see his volume go up against cover 3 like almost every wide receiver 1 does. The Colts use cover 3 more than any defense. It's Gus Bradley. It's just what he does. And so he's going to see a lot of single high safeties and I think have the opportunity to make some big plays this week. Who knows if Caleb and the offensive line are going to find cohesion in delivering that down the field. But I think there's a chance. And also I think Moore is just people are so frustrated with Chicago and people see DJ Moore is so frustrated and everything. And he really feels like one that you might be able to buy low on compared to some of these other guys. I'm really curious what you think, Pat.
Yeah, so the frustration, I think that even extends to some of the parents of players. Roma Dunze's dad is apparently posting video of times where Rome has been open and Caleb hasn't seen him or hasn't made the throw to him. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about DJ Moore too. And I think in Jacob's excellent thread with the team-by-team receiving breakdowns, he pointed out that DJ Moore is top 10, I believe, in expected points. And I know those numbers come from Fantasy Points. Hat tip to those guys. Their data suite is fantastic. So yeah, I think the offense is going to get better. I'm optimistic cautiously about Caleb. We know it's going to be bumpy for a rookie quarterback, but I do think he is going to be leaning on DJ Moore more so than with the rookie, who's also trying to find his way. Rome is going to be a fantastic player, but he's still trying to process everything too. DJ Moore has thrived in offensive ecosystems worse than this one. And I know that the Bears offensive line, especially the interior, has been kind of a train wreck so far this season, but yes. I do think they're going to pull it together and that this passing game is going to look more functional than it has so far.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ryan Poles, his calling card was supposed to be evaluating offensive line talent, didn't always use a lot of capital to put together and assemble this Bears offensive line with the idea of, look, I can out-scout the NFL in this regard. Looked good last year. has not looked good so far, and a bad offensive line will derail every offense, regardless of who's coordinating it. Just in a very competitive super flex league I'm in, just trade this week was Sam Darnold for Caleb Williams straight up. Thought it was very interesting. Who would you guys take rest of season, Darnold or Caleb Williams?
I'll go Caleb. That is really interesting though.
It's Team Caleb for me too, but the
Okay.
gap is more narrow than it was before the season, without question.
I mean, what Kevin O'Connell's doing with what he's doing with Darnold right now is pretty impressive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell versus Shane Waldron does narrow the gap. So
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. From a talent standpoint, I'll take Caleb any day, but when you consider the system, it's a little tricky. Let's get to another player that's really interesting from a fantasy standpoint. Those who listen to the show know I'm a huge fan of his, but I've been off his bandwagon because I don't feel like the offense has been the same with him of late. But now things could change. Pacheco's injured, and yes, we're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, and yes, we're talking about Travis Kelce. So, Pat, I'll start with you. Is Kelce a buy low candidate?
I think so, tentatively. The snap shares are up. They were kind of down, trending downward last year, and maybe it was going to be one of those things where Andy Reid was going into Greg Popovich mode and doing the load maintenance in anticipation of having Kelce at his best for the most important games of the year, the playoffs. But like he's played 89%, 91% of the snaps in their first two games. So that's not the issue. Is it possible he is in the age-related decline phase of his career? Absolutely. A tight end in his mid-30s. But you would think the Chiefs would still want him prominently involved now that Hollywood Brown is out for the season. Isaiah Pacheco is out for the foreseeable future. You would think they would need him to be more involved than he has been so far. So I do think he's a buy low, but not without, the risk that he has started to go over the age cliff.
Jacob?
Yeah, I've got a really interesting note from Scott Barrett of Fantasy Points. He said that Kelce's actual route share last week, according to their tracking, was 58%, which runs completely contrary from what you see from most data sources. They have him around 85%. So I watch a lot of film, and I know that sometimes check and releases get flagged as a route, or even blocking on a screen pass gets flagged as a route. Scott said another thing is RPOs, where the receiver is run blocking, may get flagged as a route. I think it's really, really interesting to think that there might be a real important distinction here, because that's a massive difference. If he's only actually running around about half of the dropbacks, I don't know why that would be the case. And it doesn't, like, the idea of like, oh, they're trying to keep him healthy. You wouldn't want him blocking more, would you? That doesn't make sense to me. I do know the Chiefs are using way more tight ends this year, more 2 and 3 tight end sets. And I think that's a good thing. I think it makes more sense that we would see over time that those other tight ends would be blocking. Kelce would be out running routes more often. And with more tight ends being on the field and fewer receivers being on the field, he has less target competition. Does that, make sense? Like, the only real competition is Worthy and Rice, if Worthy's even on the field. And Worthy has been used almost exclusively as like a deep ball space clearer for the offense. His target rate's really low. So I think it makes sense that Kelce will be more involved. His target share is only 14% right now. We've never seen anything like that. So my guess is, the Chiefs might end up leaning a little bit more pass heavy going forward, and Kelce will probably be a bigger part of it, but I'm much more excited to buy these receivers we've talked about, to be honest.
I'm with you guys on that one. Let's move to another player here. This is a player who a lot of us love his talent, and I think it's funny because the narrative on him would be a lot different if he, a ball, if game of inches, like if he catches that pass that's just a little bit out his extended reach, he doesn't have a big catch radius. It's Tank Dell last week with the Texans against the Bears. I mean, he came this close to having a 65-yard touchdown, changes his whole week, changes the outlook. He might be a guy you can just buy really cheap right now, I think, for people on the panic mode. Are you guys panicking? Let's start with you here this time, Jacob. Are you panicking on Tank Dell, or do you see him as a buy low?
I'm not panicking at all. I believe in Tank Dell's talent. I believe in the offense, and he's only run 2 fewer routes than Nico Collins for the team lead. He's run 1 fewer route than Stephon Diggs. He has 1 fewer target than Stephon Diggs. He's averaging 0.12 fantasy points per route run. Last year, he averaged 0.5 as a rookie. I just don't. I think it's a 2-game sample size.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I just think it's going to be a little bit more volatile with Tank Dell than some other receivers, just because of the 3 sharing targets with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. Like by the nature of that, there are going to be some weeks where he just doesn't get his full share of the targets. But this is also a guy who can, do heavy damage on just 1 or 2 catches and sort of make his weekly fantasy quota for you on just one big play, basically. So, I think just keep riding with Tank Dell. And if anyone is panic selling, this wouldn't be a bad time to, talk to that person and see what you could offer.
I'm starting him this week. I drafted him a few places just because I wanted to make sure I wasn't only exposed to my guy Nico Collins, and I'm just continuing to start him. I'm not worried about it at all, even though we've gotten nothing from him. I think I have him. Yeah, I have him ranked 23rd this week. Pat, does that track with about where you're at?
Yeah.
I have him ahead of Stephon Diggs, even one spot ahead of Rashid Shaheed. I know that sounds crazy, but I like the matchup against Minnesota. I think there's going to be a lot of passing. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he gets on track this week.
Same. I think I've Diggs 22 and Dell 23.
I'm a little more skeptical this week, just because I think Brian Flores has been doing such a phenomenal job with that defense, and I think there's an opportunity for him.
That's been so fun.
Stroud. Yeah,
he does take risks though. That
he does.
That increases the chance of the Texans maybe hitting on a few big plays. So,
and that's Dell's sweet spot right there. All right, let's get into one more player here. Amari Cooper. It's been a very rough ride. I just watched Cleveland Browns tape from last week because the Giants are playing the Browns this week for a podcast I'm doing. Man, that offense looks so out of sync, but Amari Cooper was really close to making an unbelievably big fantasy play last week. He cooked his the DB, but Watson's just not getting him the ball on time or on target. Where are we at with Amari Cooper? Is this a situation where with the quarterback play that's there, it's going to be hard to unlock consistent fantasy value? I'll start with you this time, Pat.
It seems like there have been a lot of off-target throws to Cooper, and maybe that's just inevitable with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. Although Cooper was the one pass catcher for the Browns who did manage to work with Deshaun Watson last year. Like it took Joe Flacco to unlock everyone else in that offense, but Coop was the guy who actually performed well with both guys. But it's been weird. Coop also has like a 23% drop rate right now. He let one in week 1. A lot of off-target throws from Deshaun Watson in that game, but he threw a dime to Cooper in garbage time. That would have been a 41-yard touchdown, and Cooper let it go right through his hands. And I think he also dropped a touchdown in week 2, I want to say. So, it's just, it's been uncharacteristic, but I don't believe that somehow, Quentin Johnston has transferred his hands to Amari Cooper. And I think Cooper is going to be okay. I'm not real eager to buy into anything on this Browns offense right now, but I still think there's maybe a buy low opportunity with Cooper.
Quentin Johnston Space Jam Amari. That's crazy. I mean, Cooper is wide receiver 11 in expected fantasy points, and he's like wide receiver 90 in actual fantasy points. And I do think part of that has to do with his play, not just Deshaun Watson. To me, he doesn't look quite as dominant as he has in the past. So there's some reason for hesitancy. I think if I'm buying Amari Cooper, it's truly just like praying for Jameis Winston, like, please come rescue us, because I don't really think it's going to get on track. Otherwise, this offense looks broken to me.
Yeah, it's hard to get around that right now, that idea of this offense looking broken. Deshaun Watson, by the way, I saw it during his Texans days, but he really has a long windup in his throwing motion, and it's really debilitating for a quarterback to stay on time in any kind of offense when you have a really long delivery. We've seen so many quarterbacks throughout history struggle with that. So we'll see what happens. When we come back, we're going to talk about a few more guys who maybe buy lows, but you're buying them real cheap at that point. But first, we're going to take a quick break to hear a word from one of our sponsors.
A Quiet Place Day 1 is now streaming on Paramount Plus. It's thrilling, terrifying. It will make your heart pound out of your chest. A Quiet Place Day 1, now streaming.
We got to get that one off the track list. It's unsettling.
It's an unsettling. For those watching on YouTube, you might have seen our preview for A Quiet Place. Very unsettling. I'm not a scary movie guy. Are you guys scary movie guys?
Yeah.
I am.
Oh, okay. So I don't know why you would consider it unsettling, Jacob. It feels like it's right up your alley. It's
because when I choose to watch a scary movie, I know what I'm getting into. When you're watching a fantasy football podcast, and all of a sudden you A Quiet Place, it's just too much. Like, holy
it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. But we're gonna get back into the show. We're gonna get back to a couple more guys that are really, if you're buying them really low from where they're projected and where they're perceived right now. I'm gonna start with a player I had 0 shares of across 23 leagues. I had him way low in my rankings. I think Jacob crushed me for this in his email where he decimated Dan Schneier's pathetic rankings, though. This one doesn't look so pathetic so far. It's Michael Pittman. So where I'm at with Michael Pittman is I don't trust the offense to stay in rhythm and stay on schedule. With Anthony Richardson, I think he's going to make some huge plays, but I don't think that fits Pittman's skill set. And now Josh Downs is due back this week. So is there hope for Michael Pittman?
Ben's going to hear it in the YouTube comment section for another victory lap. I don't even remember talking about Michael Pittman, to be honest. No RPO targets is a big deal. He averaged 0.9 fantasy points per route run on RPO plays and like 0.3 on all other ones. Ended up around 0.4 last year. He's just not being nearly as efficient so far. They are forcing the ball, but the offense looks like a mess. I don't really have much hope. Do you have any?
My only hope for Michael Pittman right now is that their defense is so completely wretched that the Colts might have to throw a lot more than they wanted to. Like, I thought this was going to be one of the league's run heaviest offenses. I don't know if they can afford to be run heavy when they're playing from behind all season, because this defense is just so abominable. And now they don't have DeForest Buckner. Like, they knew the Packers were going to run last week and stuff the box, and they still couldn't stop the Green Bay running game. And like, as you said earlier, Dan, like they can't cover outside receivers either. Like, they've got problems at all 3 levels of the defense. I just don't see how this gets better. And that maybe forces Shane Steichen to open things up on offense.
Right.
We'll see. But Pittman's averaging under 1 yard per route run right now. It just hasn't been pretty.
Yeah, the volume is just not where it used to be with Gardner Minshew.
Josh Downs is coming back, man. I think Downs might come in and like have a real important role, because especially like last week, the offense looked like it just couldn't find its footing at all, and it's like they need easy layup targets. And
it might help Pittman, honestly, in the long run, as far as getting him more red zone looks and just easier opportunities. We'll see. We're gonna move to another player who, I'm gonna say right now, maybe we should be buying. I'm going to start before turning it over to you guys. I'm going to have Jacob touch on this one first. It's Terry McLaurin. I'll say this as far as McLaurin goes. I watched the film last week against the Giants, and the Giants played a scheme. Shane Bowen, their defense coordinator, giving so much space to the wide receivers. But when you finally press up on these receivers, and I know a defensive coordinator is going to do it soon, because Jaden Daniels is so far to me proven to be more of a one-read quarterback thus far, and I think the stats bear that out. And the system is so horizontal. Why not challenge him by putting guys up on the line of scrimmage? I think McLaurin will have some opportunities. So I like him as a buy low. Are you guys high on buy low? McLaurin as a buy low. I'm going to start with you, Jacob.
I do think we're going to see more deep passing at some point. The air yards were completely gone last week. And so you saw McLaurin had like 30 yards, 40 yards on like 6-7 catches, something like that. I think we'll see more. And I also think like no one else in the offense is emerging. Luke McCaffrey had 0 targets last week. Although for what it's worth, Fantasy Points data has his separation scores is like decent. But yeah, overall, I'm just not really looking to buy anyone from this offense. Maybe Brian Robinson, if you feel good about him. The dropbacks are just not resulting in targets. I want to say it was like 33% of the pressure dropbacks have resulted in a target, which is just absolutely absurd. But that's just kind of where we're at, is Jaden is looking to get away from pressure by scrambling so often, or he's just getting sacked. And so it's kind of like what we've had in the past with Justin Fields, where the per route target rates are going to be so low, because so many of those routes, you're running a route and then turning around to see your quarterback got scrambled or he's trying to run or whatever. I don't really want any part of this Washington offense, to be honest.
I'm hoping Jaden evolves as the season goes on, and we know he's a good downfield passer, and he showed it at LSU. I'm overweight on Terry McLaurin this year, and maybe I was underestimating the horizontal nature of the Cliff Kingsbury passing game, because right now Jaden Daniels is averaging, I believe, like 4.5 intended air yards per throw. That's a pretty alarming number. And what you were saying, Dan, what's to prevent opposing cornerbacks from like jumping these short routes?
Yeah.
And at that point, you have to open things up a little bit to, give your receiver some breathing room. So
Malik Nabers has more air yards than the Commanders.
That's an unbelievable stat. I'm going to use that one, Jacob, on a future podcast. Maybe not this one, but I love that. Let's move forward to another player. Okay, this one I'm intrigued by, because I think both Jacob and I were super high on him preseason. And then the quarterback kind of derailed things fast. But I will say this as we get to this player, and you guys can try to guess who I'm talking about. The quarterback who's now starting for this team looked really good last year. And I watched his tape from the start he made, and he threw for 356. Some of it was garbage time. Some of it was just anticipation, getting the ball out on time. One of the two most underrated traits for a quarterback, and just still has a little bit of arm talent left. It's Andy Dalton, and we're talking about Deontay Johnson here. So, Pat, where were you at preseason with Deontay Johnson, and where are you at now?
Like you guys, I was pretty high on him. I was above consensus and drafted him in a few spots for sure. So I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic that Andy Dalton can perk up Deontay Johnson, who as it is, I mean, is leading the Panthers in targets by a good bit. I think he's got a dozen and no one else has more than 7. So I think his place in this target pecking order is secure. We just need more productivity from the passing game, and maybe, you know, Andy Dalton can be this year's Joe Flacco. Maybe not to that extent, but certainly more productive than Bryce Young was.
Yeah.
I think the Flacco comparison is fair. Like, probably not going to get quite the magic on a real life level, but in terms of producing, if we see them dropping back to pass a lot, which I think is totally realistic because they're going to be playing behind, their defense has looked awful, and their run game also hasn't been very good. I think it was 58 dropbacks in the one Andy Dalton start last year. We could see something like that, and we could just see a ton of overall passing volume. So I want to say Deontay's, I'm trying to pull it up here. Sorry. Deontay, his target share in the first half is 33%. It's dropped off a little bit in the second half of games because it's just been a dumpster fire. But yeah, I think that's the kind of role that he's looking at. And if there's 40-ish dropbacks, like that's 10 targets, you know, like we're going to see a ton of volume for him. So I think he's definitely probably the top of the buy low list because nobody wants him. You might be able to buy him for almost nothing.
I'm going to say one thing on this. The way that I've seen Deontay Johnson win, just is just more of a film of observation. May not check out with the stats, Jacob. Over the course of his career, at his peak is at the intermediate level, and I think that actually meshes well with what Andy Dalton does. His best as a passer. So I think that's just something to keep an eye on. Look for some of these kind of in-breaking and out-breaking routes in that intermediate range, and if Andy Dalton could start dialing those up, we're going to see some consistent fantasy production from Deontay. He's a buy low for me for sure. One more guy who I'm not as enthused about, Jacob. Maybe you can be different, so I'll let you start. It's Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Dating back to 2022, the only quarterback with a lower off-target rate than Andy Dalton is Geno Smith.
Wow.
Christian Kirk, yeah, I'm not buying Christian Kirk. I'm not touching him. I'm really worried about the offense. I will say, in this wide receiver thread I did, or just passing game thread, where I was looking at the target distribution and the expected fantasy points, I was shocked to see that Kirk was highest on the Jags in expected fantasy points, and understand how that could be the case. And so I reached out to Scott Barrett, and he let me know that there have been nullified plays by penalties, and that goes into their expected fantasy points model, which is obviously really cool. And so, yeah, Kirk had a touchdown called back last week. I didn't catch that because I have not been wanting to watch the Jaguars. But yeah, maybe he gets going this week. It's a matchup where targets might get funneled over the middle of the field. But yeah, I'm just not buying him.
It's funny. I was thinking the same thing. Like, I need to do some sort of all 22 deep dive on the Jaguars because I've not seen a lot of them, nor have I really wanted to. But like Jacob, I'm reluctant to buy into this passing game right now, and it's just I don't understand why. I know Kirk had the touchdown nullified last week, but for him to get 4 targets in a game where the Jaguars were trailing for much of it and no Evan Engram is strange. For Christian Kirk's average depth of target this year, when they have Brian Thomas, who was this great vertical threat at LSU, and Gabe Davis, and Christian Kirk's average depth of target is like 18 yards this year so far. Like, they're just things about Kirk's usage that confuse me, and I maybe need to get a better handle of what's
their
going on.
offense has been super weird. They're like, it seems like they want to be really run heavy. They're running a ton of first downs, and they're running more like heavy personnel type stuff than they have in the past, and doing a lot of play action, deep shots and stuff like that, which I think is kind of contributing to Kirk's ADOT. Yeah, I don't know. It's been super strange.
Like kind of a Darrell Bevel type offense. Almost.
Yeah, that is what that's a good call. But I think maybe people who are from the Wisconsin area will have a better idea of what that means, Darrell Bevel. But no, some of our older fans will also know that reference. But everybody should know. You know the Darrell Bevel reference. Like, I asked Jacob. I go to Jacob because he's the young guy on the staff.
Only sort of.
Okay, fair enough. But You don't want to be a Darrell Bevel offense. I think we can both say that pretty clear, at least from a fantasy standpoint. So hopefully things will change there. I kind of agree with Pat, though. This, to me, I watched them one game on film, the game against the Browns. It's a good defense, but the Browns are a little banged up, and that offense looks broken to me right now. So who knows when it will get back on track. I'm not willing to buy that. We're going to take one more quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. I promised Jacob before this I won't do another frightening ad to lead us into our final segment, which is searching for some sell highs.
Can I get a spot real quick?
Yeah, sure, man. Hey, wait a minute. You're Dave Richard from FFT.
Yeah.
Huh. Hey, I snagged Alvin Kamara in the 4th round. What do you think?
Is it PPR?
Yeah, full point.
All right, let's wrap up here by talking some potential sell highs. We're going to start here with the man who just put all that touchdown regression from all the expected touchdown regression to play in week 2. Didn't score many, and then scored a bunch in 2023 and scored a bunch in week 2. That's James Cook. Is he a sell high to you, or do you think that we're going to be seeing more touchdowns moving forward?
On these, I wanted it to be more of a comparison, like where do you have them rest of season? We can do sell high, and anyone can take it that way if they want on these guys.
Okay.
But I'm curious, like James Cook or Jahmyr Gibbs rest of season. James Cook, Devon Achane, are they? To me, those two are clearly ahead of him. James Cook or Alvin Kamara, James Cook or Josh Jacobs. Like, where does he fit into that range for you guys?
I'd rather have Cook than Gibbs, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is why I would not trade Cook for Brandon Aiyuk. Joe Brady loves James Cook. Like, he has, in the 11 games since Brady took over as offensive coordinator, I think Cook has averaged 16.6 carries and like 3.5 targets. So basically 20 opportunities a game. And it just seems like he is. And for so long, we thought there was never going to be a running back who was completely essential to that offense as long as Josh Allen was around, because Josh Allen was like the drainer of running back value. But James Cook has totally defied that since Joe Brady has taken over. And I just I feel like with 11 games, it's no longer a small sample size. Like, this is the way it's going to be.
I do worry a bit about his ability to hold up under the workload. And I also do think that we see Ray Davis start to cut into the role more and more. I think that they had a plan in place when they drafted Ray Davis where they did. And I really like Ray Davis as a talent. But yeah, if Cook stays healthy and maintains his role, then yeah, he's going to be a monster because they run like crazy. Where are you guys at with Kamara? Like, would you take Cook over him pretty easily?
I would.
How about Jonathan Taylor?
I'd still rather have JT, although
Yeah.
the concerns about the Colts though, and being knocked out of like run friendly game scripts, like that could be a problem for JT.
Kamara looked a lot. I'll say this about Kamara because I got a chance to watch them on tape finally. He looked a lot fresher than he did at any point last season. So
his top speed was higher than it's been in 3 years.
Exactly.
Wow.
So I'm wondering if that's something that I shouldn't actually be selling high end, though. You know, I'm interested. I'm curious who's lower on Gibbs rest of the season, me or you, Pat. When I was putting together my preseason rankings, I just couldn't find a low enough spot for him, and I ended up putting him. I kind of regret where I put him because I ranked him higher than I really felt comfortable with what he was. Gibbs never made sense to me, and I look at their game script, and I just still don't really see the point. Like I don't understand the high ranking of Gibbs outside of wow, he looks good on tape and he flashes. He has amazing talent.
He is amazing. His offense is projected for the most points basically every single week, and he's
sharing the role.
He's playing the smallest possible role, whereas James Cook is playing the largest possible role.
Right.
Like
I want the largest possible role.
Right now, we're not playing for tomorrow. Championship's not tomorrow.
I don't know when that rule changes for Gibbs, though. Unless
any injury. Amon St. Brown injury, Sam Laporta injury, James Williams injury.
Montgomery.
You don't think they get him more involved in the passing? Obviously, Montgomery.
I don't think it's enough unless the red zone rule changes. I really don't.
I don't know, man. His target per route running is up from 21% to 27%. I think they really want to get the ball in his hands, especially out in space as a receiver. I think any passing game injury, it would just be more.
We're at odds on this one, Jacob, because to me, fantasy is still a touchdowns game, and I don't see the touchdown upside for Jahmyr Gibbs to the point of
the best offense in the NFL. Of course, his touchdown upside.
Montgomery had 13 touchdowns last year in 14 games, and he already has 2 in 2 games. That's where the touchdowns go to me. Just my personal opinion of where those touchdowns are headed. And they have been so far. So we'll see if he can break that mold, Gibbs. It's not that I don't like Gibbs. I just don't understand the ranking of Gibbs. Like
I'm
all the guys
you mentioned because of the name.
What'd you say?
I'm taking this personally because of the name.
I respect that. I respect that. Pat,
You
would you
don't- you don't
So
like
where'd
Drew.
you? I've got him
Where's
RB9 in my rest of season
Okay.
rankings. Where are you guys approximately?
Jacob?
I haven't done rest of season rankings, but Fantasy Pros has him at RB5 behind Bijan, Brees Hall, Saquon, Jonathan Taylor. I would have Achane ahead of him. I think you could put Kamara ahead of him. That might be crazy. So yeah, I think somewhere between 5 and 7.
There's no way I'm taking him over Josh Jacobs, James Cook. I'm not taking him over. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, look,
So he's
I'm
probably
thinking
out
about-
of your top 10.
who is? Yeah, he's probably out of my top
He's-
10.
he-
Jonathan Taylor. I'm taking Saquon Barkley, obviously. So honestly, if Mixon get healthy, I'd rather Mixon. I want the guys who are getting the red zone looks in fantasy football. That's just where I'm at with Gibbs. I understand the offensive side, and I could be really wrong. So I might be taking the L on this one, Jacob. I'm worried I'm going to take the L on this one. We spent too much time on Gibbs. I want to talk a little bit about a player who's a little bit injured. Rachaad White, great last season. Where are we at on White moving forward rest of season?
So they have him at running back 24, Fantasy Pros rest of season.
Okay.
That is behind J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, Brian Robinson, Jordan Mason. That kind of surprised me. And I feel like I'm 1 foot out on Rachaad White, like we're both more Bucky Irving guys. But yeah, it seems like he's only 1 spot ahead of DeAndre Swift. And this is a consensus ranking. This is anybody who's turned in a rest of season ranking for Fantasy Pros. It's not just like Fantasy Pros chose this. So this is where experts have him, analysts have him at RB24. And it's like, man, Swift has looked so bad. And the offenses look so bad. That really surprised me. What do you think, Bob?
Wait, I'm sorry. Are we talking Swift or
Rachaad
Rachaad
White.
White? Okay. Yeah. So I've got him running back 22, and I feel strange being in the optimist camp based on the rest of season rankings. Like he has been grossly inefficient. Dave Cannell has seemed very content to roll with Rachaad White last year and put up with the inefficiency in his rushing because of what he offered in the passing game. And we know he's a pretty good pass blocker too. Or at least a very willing pass blocker. I don't know if Liam Cohen is going to have the same level of patience. That's my concern here, and whether Bucky Irving maybe gets an extended run at some point.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting time to buy him if you're into Rachaad White. I'm not doing it necessarily. I know Dan's not. We're not big Rachaad White guys, but like Denver on tap, we could see him break some big plays against Denver's run defense. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, this is the guy who was like RB4 last year or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, the volume was there last year. To me, it's a situation where he was really inefficient last year. He has a new offensive coordinator. Those are 2 things that are working against him. And then the big one for me is a little bit injured. I've seen some guys really fall off after the injury. And with a guy behind him who's clipping, playing good football, Bucky Irving, it's an interesting spot. And also another factor here, Baker Mayfield's unlocking areas of the passing game that he, quite frankly, didn't even unlock with Dave Canales from a verticality standpoint. So that takes away from what they were relying on White as well. If Baker's moving through his progressions as fast as he is and understanding this offense the way it looks like, he doesn't have to go check down to Rachaad White at the rate he did last year. So just
out here breaking ankles, man. Yeah, you don't need to check down. Just run for it. You're Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, exactly. He's running for it.
Shattering ankles. That was crazy.
We need to get to my boy, though, now, because I've been waiting to hear your guys' thoughts on him all show. It's Malik Nabers from the New York Giants. I mean, the numbers are absolutely absurd because of last week's game plan. But we're talking about air share numbers, air target share numbers that are crazy, overall target share numbers that are crazy. He looks like he should be pushing to be, from a target volume standpoint, in the top 5, but there's still that whole touchdown thing. We got one last week. How many we're going to get? Daniel Jones in his career has not thrown a lot of passing touchdowns. But outside of his rookie season, has it eclipsed the 15 passing touchdown mark? So it's insane, but true. So Pat, Malik Nabers, like, is he more of a sell high for you, or are you just, if you have him, you're sitting on him rest of the year?
Oh, I'm sitting on him, and I have him in a lot of spots too. I'm remembering how fun it was when you can get him in like the 5th round of drafts back in June or whatever. Yeah, I mean, he is just phenomenal. Like, he's so good at running routes, and then so good after the catch. And like, other than that unfortunate sideline drop, his hands are pretty reliable too. So it was a costly drop. Obviously, it cost the Giants a chance to win the game last week, but man, this guy's fantastic. Like, he is everything they wanted him to be and more. I have him ranked wide receiver 11 the rest of the season, and I know that's probably too low. Like, maybe 3 or 4 spots too low.
Nabers or AJ Brown dealing with a hamstring injury?
I think Nabers right now.
So Fantasy Pros has Brown at 9, Nabers at 14, ahead of Marvin Harrison at 15, behind Devontae Adams, behind Chris Olave. I think I would take him over both of those guys. Behind Devontae Smith, I think that's about where I'm at with him, is probably 12.
It's fair. Give us some of the numbers, Jacob, from last week, just for those who haven't seen your newsletter and haven't seen your Twitter page. I want to hear him again.
I don't have him off the top, but just historic stuff in terms of volume. Him and Puka Nacua are the only two receivers ever to see that type of volume within their first 2 games. Him and Odell Beckham Jr., the only receivers since I think 2000 to have 15 plus targets and 200 plus air yards. Probably not since 2000 because I don't think they had air yards dating back to 2000. Maybe since 2010, but it was only him and Odell Beckham, which is fun. Both games were in Giants losses, which is not so fun. Sorry, Dan, that was a low blow. I think that was about the Gibbs thing.
Deserved. I harped on that Gibbs thing too much. Go on.
It's really unique, the type of the role that he's seeing. And like, obviously, it's like, who else are they going to throw to? Well, I mean, they actually do have some decent guys. They threw to Wan'Dale Robinson 12 times last week. But like, no, they threw to 18 times. They funneled everything to Malik Nabers. 50% of the first 3 targets were Malik Nabers. That's really, really, really rare for a rookie receiver. There's been plenty of receivers that were drafted high to a team that really needed a receiver, didn't have a lot of weapons. They didn't do this. I think it's totally realistically, he's just a special player. And while the touchdown upside is concerning, like the yardage after the catch ability is so special that with this type of target volume, he can create big plays at any point.
Yeah, the 2 stats I'll leave you guys with before we move on from Nabers is 1, he leads the NFL in 20-plus yard receptions, despite Daniel Jones having an incredibly low ADOT. Most of that has come after the catch, shows what he's capable of doing. And then 2, the big one for me is how far ahead he is of the rest of the receivers in the NFL on first read targets, because Daniel Jones has proven to be, over the course of his career, a one-read quarterback. For a while, Dable figured out you can just make him read first and then run, but then defenses took that away. Doesn't matter. Regardless of what they've tried, he's been somebody who is not good at coming off of his first read and really likes to throw to his first read. That's a great sign because Nabers is his first read almost every play. They've designed this offense for Nabers. It's probably the most funneled offense I've seen from a design standpoint so far. I have not watched every team on tape, but as far as what I've seen from the Giants and Brian Dable this year, the plan is pretty clear. We're going to get Nabers the ball. It's going to give us the best chance to win. And they're going to do it in ways underneath so they can kind of keep the clock moving and keep their defense off the field and provide easy looks for Daniel Jones, who certainly needs them. So I'm with you guys. I'm not trading him if I'm lucky. And I have him in leagues, but if I'm lucky enough to have drafted him, he's not getting traded right now. He's on this roster rest of season. Let's go to another player who I think, Jacob, you did a great job of outlining, came really close to having another 60, 70 yards last week and another touchdown, which would have just put his week even more historic. And that's Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, you can find those plays on Twitter. It's 2 clips, 2 easy ones where he had a back shoulder fade that it seemed like he could easily come down with. The throw was a little bit, it seems like the timing is a little bit off between him and Kyler, and that's probably going to improve. But at the same time, I'm curious, Pat, if you've noticed this. I've heard from Josh Norris of Underdog that maybe it's about the black cleats just looking weird when you watch it, but like he looks awkward. He looks like he's overthinking. And he said after week 1 that he was overthinking. He doesn't look as fluid and natural as I feel like he does at Ohio State. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts before we get into the data and stuff?
Maybe it is the black cleats. But yeah, I don't know if he's just, I didn't think there was going to be an adjustment period. I thought he was maybe one of the most pro-ready NFL prospects we've seen come out of the college ranks in a while. So, the disappearance in week 1 was a little strange, but that was rectified in week 2. So I'm still pretty bullish, maybe not quite as bullish as I am on Malik Nabers, who's been this force of nature. But yeah, if I had a mulligan in my dynasty rookie drafts, I'd probably take Nabers over Harrison. But man, Harrison's still right there, though. I mean, these 2 guys are going to be, first round fantasy picks for years to come.
Yeah, they've got Nabers 1 spot ahead of him rest of the season. You don't agree with that, Dan?
Well, he was talking, Pat was referencing Dynasty. It's a little bit
okay. Yeah.
As far as rest of season in redraft, I would have Nabers ahead of him slightly, but Dynasty, I think I would still lean toward Harrison just because a little bit more certainty with the quarterback situation there than whatever's going to happen with the Giants after this year. But that's all the time we have for today. We're going to wrap up there. I want to say this. Thank you so much for joining us, Pat. It was fun to finally do a show with you. We talked 13 players today. Lucky number 13. We're breaking the trend there. And listen, We're a new show. Everybody listening, you may know Jacob and myself from Beyond the Box Score or anything else we've done with FFT, but any new show needs a little help from you guys. So if you do enjoy the show, please do us a favor. Subscribe and subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this video, comment on it. All those things are going to help us grow this page, grow the show, and be able to do different things with the show. We're in our early stages. It's only going to get better from here, we hope, at least. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.